Welcome to Love by Design, the podcast for high-achieving women who are ready to stop performing for love and start building it from truth, from alignment. Hello and welcome back to Love by Design. My name is Joan. A warm welcome if this is your first time. If you're returning, a hearty hello. So if you haven't been watching, then you want to go watch. Bridgerton Season 4 dropped recently, and oh my word, the story of Sophie and Benedict, the servant and the second son, was a pure Cinderella story. And once again, we're being sold the fantasy. This time the fantasy is that love in the Regency era was pure, it was passionate, it was soul-led, that people married for love back then, not obligation, not strategy, not survival. They married for love. And watching it, you might think, why can't it be that simple anymore? Why is modern love so complicated? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you today. You might not want to hear it. It was never that simple. Bridgerton is a beautiful fantasy. And it's allowed because fiction is allowed to be fantasy. And it's a fantasy because it's selling you a romanticized version of history that erases what love actually cost women back in that era. So, as well as the Regency era, which I'm going to be talking about today, and every other era, most of it was built on female conditioning, economic necessity, and social control. The only difference between then and now is that we're the first generation that can actually see it. And with that, we can choose differently. So let's talk about it. The Bridgerton story. So Sophie and Benedict. So if you haven't watched it, Sophie is a servant, an illegitimate daughter of an earl, working as a maid. And Benedict, gorgeous, dashing, is the second son of a viscount, wealthy, titled, and he's free to choose. So they meet at a masquerade ball. They fall in love, and despite every social barrier, every single rule, every expectation, they choose each other in the end. It's beautiful, it's romantic, it's the fantasy that we all want. But here's what the show won't tell you. That actually, in Regency England, so between 1811 and 1820, somewhere around there, that marriage would have destroyed them both. Sophie would have been shunned. She would have been called a social climber, accused of seducing him for his money. And Benedict would have been cut off from his family. His social standing would have collapsed. His siblings' marriage prospects would have been ruined by cessation. And if they actually did marry, Sophie would have no legal rights, no access to money, no ability to own property, no right to her own children if the marriage failed. Because back then, women weren't people. Under the law, they were property. First, their father's property, then their husband's property. So a love match wasn't soul-led. It was luxury only the independently wealthy could afford. And for everyone else, well, marriage was just survival. You didn't marry the man you loved. You married the man who could keep you from starving. So let's talk about the reality, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good, let's be honest, passion was hot. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. So passion wasn't shamed the way that it was in the Victorian era and the other eras that followed. There was a cultural fascination when it came to romance, with poetry, and the idea of marrying for love. And we saw it. Jane Austen wrote all about it. And people dreamed and fantasized about it. And yes, some people did marry for love, but they were the exception. They were not the rule. So let's talk about the bad. Back then, women had no financial autonomy. You couldn't work, you couldn't own property, you couldn't even sign contracts. If you didn't marry, you became a burden on your family. And if you did marry, well, your husband legally owned everything, and that includes your money, your body, and your children. Talk about domestic violence, well, that was legal. Talk about marital rape, well, not a concept. You couldn't ever refuse your husband. And divorce, no way, impossible. And if you did manage it, you lost everything. You lost the children, the money, and your social standing. Onto the ugly. So back then, marriage wasn't about love. It was about bloodlines, about money, and social status and position. So fathers arranged marriages to consolidate their wealth. mothers pushed their daughters towards titled men to secure the family's future. And if you were lucky, you got a kind husband. If you weren't, well, tough. You just endured. Soul-led love? Oh, absolutely not. That was only reserved for the novels, the elites, the ones who could afford it. So in reality, love was quite dangerous. If you fell for the wrong person, someone below your class, someone without money, someone your family didn't approve of, well, you had no choice. You married who you were told to marry. End of story. Or you didn't marry at all. So here's what we romanticize when we watch Bridgerton. So what we see is all these beautiful women dressed in beautiful gowns at balls being courted by dashing, handsome men who write them poetry and love letters and declare their love for them. The couples meet, fall in love, and choose each other despite all the obstacles. A world where love matters more than money. Well, that wasn't real. What was real was that those balls, those were marriage markets. So you had maybe one season or two to secure a husband. If you didn't, you became a spinster. You became a burden on your family. The courting back then, that was supervised. It was chaperoned. You were never alone with a man until you were engaged. And even then, you barely knew him. So most women married men that they'd spent 20 hours with. But yeah, the poetry, the love letters, those were real. Real, but they were reserved for the upper class who could afford to marry for love. For everyone else, the middle class, the working class, well, marriage was all about economic survival. You married who could provide, who your family approved of, and who wouldn't ruin your reputation and your family's reputation. And here's the part that Bridgerton doesn't really show you. And that is that once you're married, you ceased to exist legally. Everything you owned becomes your husband's. And again, if he was unfaithful or cruel or he hit you, it didn't matter. It was all legal. You couldn't leave because leaving meant losing everything. So yes, the fantasy of that era of love is beautiful. It's beautiful to watch, but in reality, it was a cage. So as with every era that we've had, there's been the good and the bad, the things that we can retain and the things that we need to release. So here are a couple of things that I believe that we need to let go of. So we need to let go of the idea that passion is enough, that love conquers all, that if you feel it deeply enough, then everything will work out magically. And we saw it. We saw it in Bridgerton with the story of Sophie and Benedict, where love was enough to overcome class differences, financial insecurity, social ruin. But in reality, it wasn't, because passion without structure, without partnership, equality, and equity without financial security, that wasn't romance back then. That was a risk. So we need to release the idea that back then, that was what was going on, because passion is not enough. We also need to release the idea that back then, the partnerships, the marriages were soul-led, that there was this beautiful soul connection. It wasn't. It was all about survival, right? If you were looking for soul-led type of love, that was luxury. That was really reserved for the independently wealthy. We also need to release the fantasy that back then women had agency, because they just didn't. They couldn't choose freely. They couldn't leave safely. They couldn't exist independently. That world, when you think about it, in reality, it wasn't romantic at all. But there are a couple of things that we can retain from that era, because it wasn't all bad. So back then, we saw, watching the Bridgerton, that love should feel alive. Like it should feel like fire burning through your veins, through your blood. That passion really matters. That chemistry is part of the equation. The desire that you feel, that is sacred. So there's something of that era understood, and something that we've kind of lost as we move through the different eras, when we've now gotten to the point where it's all about compatibility checklists, that love should be a certain way. Well, the truth is, love should make you feel something. It should stir something deep inside of you. It should move you. It should wake you up. Not in a reckless way, but in a way that reminds you that you are alive. There's blood running through your veins. Another thing that we should retain is the importance of courtship, because you had no other choice. Back then, courtship was mandatory. And I'm not talking about the chaperone version of back then, no. But just the idea that even when you're dating, it should be intentional, that you should really be trying to get to know someone before you decide to commit. You can't just go rushing off to the altar in 30 days. You should be listening to the words that they're saying. Matters. You should look at their gestures. You should look at how they show up, their consistency. All those things matter. And that era really paid attention to that. And that's worth keeping. And then lastly, the poetry of it all, like the letters, the stories, the longing, the desire, all of that, being able to articulate your feeling. We've lost that. Now it's just, what are you doing? Where you at? Can I see you? Right? There's no romance in the way that we're dating today. And so I would say we need to bring that back into our dating and relationships. All of that poetic writing, the thoughtfulness, the romance, and the seduction of it all. So here's the truth. The truth is that moment in history makes this moment beautiful because it's so different. Right now, we get to have passion and autonomy, chemistry and choice, desire and financial independence. You don't have to choose between love and survival anymore. You don't have to marry for money. You don't have to endure abuse because leaving means that you'll be ruined. You don't have to disappear into marriage to feel secure. In that era, the women didn't really have a choice. They had to choose safety over passion. They had to choose security over love. They had to choose partnership over independence. Now, you can have both. What a great time to be alive, where you get to choose. The Bridgerton era did not have that. It's only now available to us. And yes, it is a little bit harder because now there are no scripts. There's no clear model of how things should work. There's no, if you just did this 5 steps, then you will get this. No. So it's a little bit harder, but with that also comes freedom because we're no longer trapped in this marriage market where we need to sell ourselves for a man to choose us. We're not having to perform for security. We're not surviving anymore. Now we are choosing. And that is the beautiful gift of this generation. We get to build the model instead of inheriting the old era, which is outdated, didn't really work, and didn't really create sovereign, conscious partnerships. So yes, let me know. Have you been watching the sensational Bridgerton? And what are your thoughts on what that era had to offer versus what we have today? So let me know. Send me a message. Shoot me your favorite part of that series, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining me this week. Next week, I will continue to talk about some of the eras, some of the things that we need to release, and some of the things that we can retain, because it's always a great thing to learn from the past, but choose to be in the present. Thank you for joining me. I will see you same time next week. This is Love by Design. Talk to you soon. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. And if it stirred something in you, trust that. Alignment isn't a concept, it is a calling. And if you're feeling the nudge to take this work deeper, then I want you to go ahead and book your Aligned Love Assessment, where we map your patterns, reveal what's keeping you stuck, and explore your journey to aligned love. You can book your session at joannwosu.com. Until next time, remember, you're not here to earn love, you're here to embody it. So keep dating by design, not by default. See you next week.